So today I have with me a very special guest. I have Lois Strachan. She is a podcaster. She's actually interviewed me. She's the only person that's ever been interested enough to interview me. So she obviously gets special status in my world. And she travels with the challenges. So, Lois, you want to give us a little bit of your background and talk about what you're doing now and what you maybe used to do?
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much. Well, okay, so my name is Lois. I live in South Africa. I'm a professional speaker. I'm an author, a disability advocate, and a podcaster. And I started my podcast back in September 2018, working through an organization called Accessible South Africa. And that means that the podcast was focused on accessible travel, where I interviewed people with disabilities who travel, and I interviewed service providers who make their services adaptive so that those of us with disabilities can travel, can partake in their activities. And I guess what I didn't mention is that I am blind, having lost my sight at the age of 21 as a result of diabetic retinopathy. So it was an interesting space for me coming into the world of disability as an adult and suddenly having to reshape pretty much my entire perspective on the world around me. And that in itself is quite a journey, as I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers will also know, having been what one considers, well, from the non-disabled perspective, coming into the disabled perspective on the world. So yeah, most of the work I do is based around the disability space, either in terms of my podcasting, my writing, and my consultancy work in advocacy.
Very nice. And you and I have talked a little before about that. Okay. I'm going to ask a personal question because you're the first blind guest I've had on. So I would like to know, and you've also made the transition from sighted to blind. So how has that impacted your travel, and how do you find travel? What are maybe some of the challenges you find now?
You know, I think realistically, I've done more travel as a blind person than I ever did as a sighted person. And it's also now most of my adult life I have been blind. I think the question I get faced with most often is not how do I travel, but why do I travel? Because a lot of people can't get their head around the idea that someone who's blind would enjoy travel. And my usual response is that I travel for exactly the same reason as a sighted person. It's just the tools and techniques that I use that differ. So rather than approaching travel and a travel experience from a visual perspective, I'm looking at how travel becomes a multi-sensory experience where my experience of a new place, a new culture, is taken in through all my other senses rather than through my eyes. And the process of travel is obviously very different. I'm not going to feast on things with my eyes. I'm going to experience them through all of my other senses. My sense of touch, my sense of smell, of sound, and the sense of feeling in terms of the atmosphere of a place, because every place, every location has an energy to it that can be felt, as well as the tactile experience. So I try, before I go somewhere, I try to learn about the stories, the history, the people, the culture, the experience of a location. And that kind of starts it gives me if one puts it into a drawing metaphor, that gives me the sketch of what my experience is about to be like. It gives me an outline of what to expect from the place. And then when I go there, I use my other senses to add texture, to add greater depth. And I really do consider, rather than sight seeing, it's more about sight experiencing. because absolutely every sense that I have gets drawn into creating that multisensory experience of the place. I use sound, I use touch, I use taste. All of that builds into the experience of visiting a location.
Very nice. Your preparation obviously has to be a little different than a sighted person's preparation for visiting a new destination. So are there tools that you use that help you, for example, in navigating? That's one of the challenges I could see is navigating. You go to New York City and you're trying to navigate around. It becomes a little different.
It does and it doesn't, because having been to New York City, it is quite a sensory overload, I think, for anyone who's visiting New
Yes.
York City for the first time. So a lot of it has to do with the ability to navigate and how you choose to travel. I personally have never been someone who enjoys traveling on my own when I was sighted or being blind. I like having someone with me, so that has certain implications. So a lot of the detail of getting from place A to place B, of navigating the busy New York streets or whichever city I'm in, I have someone with me who will help me with that. But having said that, it brings up another important point, which is about technology, because a lot of the apps that you would use to navigate around a new location, whether you're using Google Maps or Apple Maps or Waze or whichever the mapping apps that you're using, most of those are accessible. So to navigate from one location to another it can be done using a text to voice app. Yeah, that kind of location can be done. Obviously, traveling around using public transport, again, there's a lot of research would need to be done about what is the safest way, the easiest way to learn to navigate using those transit and transport options, and what would one need to do. That side of things does tend to overwhelm me quite a bit. So that's why I do prefer having a sighted person with me. And in this case, generally my husband, who also loves to travel, thankfully. So that it does. But just for me, the experience really, I love traveling with someone, because you've got the experience of, look at what's happening. Look at what you're experiencing, what's happening around us. It's fun to have someone with you to share that with. So that's really my choice. But I do have a number of visually impaired and blind friends who travel independently, and they just pick up their white canes and off they go. And they manage absolutely fine. But it does depend on their comfort levels in terms of navigating around on their own, of the comfort of being able to reach out and engage with the people around them. If there are any problems, engaging with the technology that's available to help navigate. And yeah, it really is an individual choice of how one travels as a blind traveler.
And so it was interesting. We were on the Emerald Princess and did a Panama Canal cruise, and there was a group of about 30 blind individuals on the ship that were traveling as a group, but they were pretty much all blind. And so they were, it was interesting, and I was really appreciative of how Princess helped, and I believe this would be common across the cruise lines, but they were very careful about how they provided assistance and not running up and grabbing somebody, but going up and offering it if they would like some assistance. That I remember really clearly is there was a group of three of them that were in an area of chairs, and they were trying to navigate around, and it was pretty clear that they didn't know exactly where they were. And so one of the staff went over and approached them, and again, very calm and gracious in his manner, and asked them if they needed assistance, and they said yes. And so he offered. He said he put his arm out and said, "If you'd like, my arm's here. You can, hold on." And then he took them around to several different spots. before he found what they were looking for, because they wanted a place they could sit and put their feet in the pool.
Yeah.
And,
I think,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I've got a friend here in South Africa who has traveled on a cruise liner, one of the local cruises around the African coast, and she's traveled with her guide dog. And she and I interviewed her about her experience and how the cruise liners and the company adapted and worked with her to sort out what would be most comfortable. She's someone who is newly blind, and her guide dog, I think, had been with her for a few months only at that stage. And she's always been someone who's loved cruising, like yourselves. And just to learn about how the cruise line, how the company actually engaged with the support that they gave her. But I think you raised a really important point for me, that sometimes it might look like someone with a visual impairment needs help, but often they don't. So that all important process of going up and saying, hey, can I help? How can I help? And letting them choose. Because so often as people traveling around in the world, being visually impaired, I think every single independent visually impaired person has had the experience of someone coming up and making assumptions about, you must need to do this or do that. And I speak often about situations where I was walking down a road with my guide dog, and a wonderful elderly lady approached me and said, let me help you across the road, grabbed me, grabbed my dog, took us across the road. The fact that we didn't actually need to cross that road was completely immaterial to her. Yeah, there's a lot there, and I think great to hear that in the situation that you're talking about, the people on the cruise line company have been trained to approach, offer help, and then work with the individual people to say, okay, let's see how we can help. That is such a great thing to hear.
Yes, I can imagine the challenges of taking you across the road when you didn't want to go across the road. You have to wait for them to go away so you can go back.
Exactly, so I can cross back and carry on with what I was doing. Yes, very much.
Well, so do you,
And
go ahead.
I was going to say, obviously, if I'm in a unfamiliar location, I might need a little more assistance than I will in my home environment. Also, when I travel, I do not take my guide dog with me. A lot of people do, and they travel with their dogs very comfortably. I only do local travel with my guide dog. If I'm traveling overseas, I would tend to give my guide dog some time off, and she can get a vacation at home. So a staycation, as they've come to be called now.
Yes.
But yeah, I do tend to travel with my white cane, and I go off that way, but rather than taking my dog with me when I travel.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Within a country, traveling with a dog is probably not nearly the challenge it would be traveling internationally, because you have to worry about shots and all the different requirements that countries impose on dogs. I was doing some research on a cruise for somebody that was going to travel with their dog, and started looking at every island in the Caribbean has different requirements, and it becomes a kind of a quagmire to trying to make sure you can navigate that. Okay,
Absolutely. And
so
I think that is, in terms of traveling with a guide dog, that is part of the research that one has to do.
yeah, I would agree with that. One more quick question. You talked about the sensory experience. So what is your favorite destination because of the sensory experience associated with it?
My, it's such a hard question, because every place is different and every place has its own unique signature in terms of the multisensory experience. In terms of what my favorite destination is, it's usually the next destination, because that's the unknown, and it really fits into my sense of adventure, of travel, and things like that. So at the moment, I'm my husband and I are planning trips to Europe, probably in September, and then hopefully to Mauritius in November. But in terms of places that are really special to me in terms of a multisensory experience, I have to say that the place that has had the greatest experience in terms of engaging every single one of my senses at the highest rate would probably be Las Vegas, because there is just so much going on all the time there. In terms of the experiences of working with my senses and constantly being drawn in different directions for different experiences, I'd probably say Kolkata in India, because wow, that is, as a city, it is constantly, every sense is being used in different ways constantly wherever you are. In terms of, obviously, food plays a huge role in that, and there are different countries where the food becomes almost an adventure on its own, and I'd count Kolkata and India into that. Any of the Mediterranean countries like Spain or Italy or Greece, there's so much of an adventure in terms of the food. But at every place that I go engages my senses constantly, which does mean that I try to ensure that I have enough downtime, just time to regather my energy, because otherwise I'm on high alert in every sense of the word as I'm traveling. So taking a bit of downtime is important to do as well.
Yeah, and I think that is true for most people that travel with challenges, having
Mhm.
some downtime. I made the mistake recently. We crammed way too much in a 3 week period of time. And at the end of the trip, my wife said that if I did that to her again, one of us would be dead. And I
And
don't think she was talking.
yeah,
Yeah, I think
that
she was looking at me.
I mean, we're all tempted to cram as much as we can into a vacation. But the reality is, you shouldn't need time to recover from a vacation when you get back. Sometime, obviously, with the logistics of jet lag and just getting past that. But you shouldn't need another holiday to get over a holiday. It just shouldn't be that way. But at the same time, yeah, I think most of us do push ourselves to experience as much as possible when we go somewhere. So that's
Yeah.
part of the fun of it. And sometimes we need to remember and take that mental check to say, whoa, am I doing too much? Do I need to take a little bit of a break to just regather my energy? So I do try to be mindful of that when I travel. And there are times that I tell my husband, you go off, and my husband is a marathon runner. So go off, have a run. You can explore through running. And then when you come back, we can talk about the great things you've seen, and then maybe go and explore those ourselves together later. But give me some time just to stay at the apartment or the hotel. I'll busy myself, or I'll just take some downtime. I'll read, I'll listen to some music and just relax. And then once you've gone finished with your running, we can start exploring again together.
Okay, so now, I think that sending him on a run might have an ulterior motive, because if he runs a long ways and then he comes back, he's probably not going to be charging quite as hard as he would without the
Uh-huh.
run.
Especially seeing as he's over 6 foot and 5'2". So to walk with my husband, I spend a lot of my time trotting. So
Yep, I know, I understand that. Listen, Lois, it has been amazing talking to you. I've enjoyed our conversation so much. I would look forward to, maybe we'll meet someday somewhere along the way, and we'll keep in touch in this.
I hope I've given you a slight touch of some of the amazing diversity of experiences that South Africa has to offer, because very definitely, I love the country I live in. Yes, we have some issues as well, as every country does. and one has to take those into consideration when traveling. But there really is, South Africa is a beautiful country, and there's so much diversity of beauty, both in the cities and the nature. And so hopefully I've given you a slight taste of what coming to South Africa might be like.
You have done that, and you've made me hungry to make the trip. Now,
Well,
now I have to figure out how to fill my bank enough to travel again.
that sadly is one of the realities that we all have to face, and those of
Yeah.
us who love travel.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ken, thank you so much. It's been great to talk to you.